special needs services that are provided centrally, but that would count, I think, as educational services, not administrative overhead. Simply put, this is a budget that puts kids first, it puts bureaucrats second, and I think it puts politicians third, which is probably how it should be. Our budget continues to improve funding for non-magnet schools. Under this budget, we will spend more per student at Buckley, Weaver, and Hartford Public than we do at any magnet high school. 7 years ago, that was not the case. Under this budget, we will spend more per student at Clark, Milner, Sands, Simpson, Waverly, King, McDonough, and Burns than we spend at Hooker, Breakthrough, Kinsella, and Webster. 7 years ago, that was not the case. In short, under this budget, we will do the same work with less, and we will spend more in our schools, especially our neediest schools. Finally, I know there's been a good deal of talk about the board and the city potentially consolidating services to save money. We would welcome that kind of discussion. We're confident that if we work together, we can save the city money and provide our taxpayers with better services. I'm going to turn them over to Dr. Jacoby and Ms. Altieri, who will give you the guts and substance of our presentation today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Jacoby.
Thank you. It's a privilege, really, to be back again in Hartford. I'm going to take a minute, if I could, to make an announcement before we begin to talk about the budgets. I know some of you were interested in the parent meeting that was called for to occur this evening at Buckley School. That meeting is being postponed and has been postponed till May 29th at 6 o'clock. It will be held at the Communities That Care building. We'll make sure that you have notice of that meeting. I do know that I met for about an hour today with Ms. Green, I asked if I could hire her because she is a lady that really gets things done, and she's the woman that started the interest in this community meeting, and she's agreed to postpone. She will be there tonight if in case anybody arrives in the parking lot. The reason for that, folks, is that we've got a 5-school musical extravaganza going on at Buckley in the auditorium, and we don't want to lose the flavor of that. So she was very agreeable to making the change. We want this to occur in the community, and we're going to work cooperatively with her, as will be the police as well as the mayor and anyone else we think, community agencies as well. So I wanted to let you know that so you don't feel like you have to take a break to join the meeting.
Thank you.
I'll take a deep breath and I'll go back to the budget. I will be presenting tonight with our capable CFO, Paula Altieri. We're going to present the 14-15 proposed budget. I want to sort of clarify that I've been here about a month now, and so as special assistant to the board, I've reviewed the budget document carefully. I've met with a number of people to make sure I had an understanding of the budget. I probably asked far too many questions, and I hopefully am bringing my knowledge of Hartford Public Schools, having served here 6 years ago, and my educational leadership experience over a number of years as I interpret this budget for you. I would characterize the budget similar to what Mr. Waring characterized it as, one that is fiscally responsible, one to me that is very important. It's budgeting for a plan. If you budget without a plan, budgets never work well. And the third, it has a central purpose. The purpose is focusing resources on educating, inspiring, and supporting our Hartford students and their families. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide. Joanna, are you doing that?
Yep.
Okay. We have 3 strategic focuses. These are not unique to this year, and that's important because in order to really achieve your focuses, you have to concentrate on those focuses for a period of time. We have what's called the 3rd grade promise, that our youngsters will read at or above grade level by the time they have completed their 3rd grade, and we're making gains in that arena. We'll talk a little bit later about that. We aren't there yet, but we're making gains. The second focus is around our middle school, and a little bit later I'll share some information about some of our successes at the middle grades. This is an area that we're going to be doing quite a bit of concentrating on this upcoming year. And finally, college readiness. We want youngsters, and people ask, why do you use that term college readiness? Because we all know when we look to the future that we all need to be able to do much more complex things regardless of the kind of work we choose to do once we finish high school. I can tell you that without stealing the thunder of the governor and a few others, that tomorrow we will be celebrating at a press conference some pretty exciting news about how we have been able to move this particular focus forward. So, while advancing the reform effort over the last 7 years and developing a choice system, we have achieved a number of things. Our graduation rate has doubled from 31% to 64%, and we'll be able to provide you tomorrow with an even greater increase. We've opened several new schools. I'm not going to read what's on the slide or in your PowerPoint. Important, in 2013, 14 of our schools are in the goal range as compared to 4 from the beginning of the reform. And if you take a look at those schools, we're going to see that a number of schools are also progressing and moving into that goal arena. They're pretty close. 15 schools had scores that increased, and 10 of these were non-magnet schools. We're constantly being asked about how we're treating our Hartford traditional schools that may have themes but are not magnet schools. We want to have equity. That's very important to us. So we're looking at how well the youngsters are achieving, and I think Mr. Waring spoke about funding. We want to be sure that the funding is certainly equitable. And finally, I mentioned earlier that middle grade group of kids, one of the toughest areas to work in. 6th grade performance in 4 of the areas tested by standardized tests, we made significant gains. And there were significant gains across the district in reading in grades 3, 5, 6, and 10. Very important because those are transition grades. You know that there's a big change that happens when you leave the primary K through 3 and move into 4 through 6. There's a big change that happens from 5 to 6, and the same thing as kids move into high school. So those gains are important. And finally, a partnership that we've launched this year and is beginning to show fruition is we're sharing resources with the Hartford Public Library. We haven't defined that as well as we should just yet, but we've got a real good beginning there, and we think that's a way that we can enhance student learning and community access. And I wish that I had brought the email that I received from a young lady that I met visiting at Renzulli Academy the other day, who was so excited about the fact that they had just received 100 new books. And she asked her teacher if she could take me into the room where they were not yet completely unpacked so I could smell the new books. That's how excited this kid was about reading. And she knew exactly what series was in that box, and as soon as it was ready to go, she was ready to start reading it. So that partnership with the Hartford Public Library is really, really important. So what are our budget priorities? Is that where we are? Okay. We are basically supporting student growth. How are we doing that? You know, we also have a number of, we're impacted by a number of federal mandates and state mandates, and one of those is around strengthening Common Core standards. It is one thing to strengthen Common Core standards in a suburban district. It's another thing to strengthen Common Core standards in an urban setting, and that's a tougher task, and that's something we're moving towards so that we can support our students in growing just like the suburban kids are. We also are accelerating our college and career readiness. We're doing more capstone projects, meaning graduation projects. We're doing more internships and externships, so youngsters get an opportunity to go out and learn what's happening in the real world. And we're increasing the number of youngsters who are taking PSATs and SAT prep. Not only increasing the number, but we're starting to see an increase in the scores on those tests that the youngsters are taking. But you have to first help them get the courage and confidence to take the tests, and then you can work on making certain that they're increasing their achievement. And another important piece, and frankly a part of it, we were out of compliance with the English language learners. I had the opportunity in the last 6 weeks since I've been on board to meet with the person who's directing that program now. Let me tell you, it's moving in the right direction. So we're doing more for English language learners. We're going to work hard to make sure that they exceed grade level performance. We're no longer going to accept the fact, because English is their second language, that they are not achieving as well as some of our other youngsters. The fourth priority is to support 4 of our lowest performing schools in a variety of ways. And last but not least, public engagement. We're creating true partners in education with our parents. If I could digress for just a moment, 6 years ago when I was here, there are 2 things that have struck me in the last 6 weeks that I'd like to share with you. The first is we always had interested parents, but we didn't necessarily have interested parents that advocated in a way that resulted in getting what they thought was in the best interest of their children. I can see the difference 6 years later in terms of things like Parent University. A Friday, I got on a bus with a group of parents to wish them well. They did a overnight retreat all about parent training, parent advocacy. We have governance councils in each of our schools who vote on their school budgets, and sometimes they vote no. We have to live with that. Most of them voted yes, right, Paula? So I'm seeing a huge difference 6 years later. The other difference that I think is very important for you to hear about, the strength of the leadership at the schools. It's a stronger leadership model than was here previously. Now, why do I share that with you, and why is it important? Because there are 2 things that we know that make a huge, huge difference in school improvement, meaning student success. One is strong leadership at the building level. It's great to have somebody on top that knows what they're doing, but if you don't have somebody in the building level that knows what they're doing, you're in trouble. You've got a much stronger leadership team. The second thing you need are strong teachers. And part of what strong leaders do is grow strong teachers. So I think those 2 things, the parent engagement and the strength of the leadership at the school level, bodes really well, and I'm very excited about the new superintendent who's coming in who really understands school improvement. I have great hope for Hartford, and I wanted to share that. And so, my last, before Paula takes over, is this me or thee? I'm doing this. Okay. Budgeting for success. We wanted to be sure that the budget showed things were equitable and it was transparent. So we'll be happy to answer any questions where you don't think it appears to be transparent. We allocated monies for, parent empowerment was very important, and as I said to you, all of our parents, with the exception of 1 school, voted on the budget, and the majority of those parents voted yes on their particular budget. And finally, we wanted this budget to be fiscally responsible and educationally responsive, and we think that's what we did. So with that, I'll let Paula talk money.
Okay, good evening.
Baby.
So as we're looking at the 2014-15 proposed all-funds budget, you'll notice that we have 2 funds that make up our total education budget. One is general fund and one is our special funds, also known as grants. The 2014-15 recommended general fund budget is $284 million. This reflects an increase of $1 million, excuse me, or 0.4% over the 2013-14 general fund budget of $283 million. And I just wanted to note on here that $1 million is the funding that was appropriated in this current year through the CIP fund, which will revert back to the general fund, reinstated to the general fund pursuant to the 1-year stipulated agreement between the City of Hartford and the Board of Education and the State Department of Education. The 2014-15 recommended special funds budget is $139 million and reflects a decrease of $6 million, or 4.2% over the 2013-14 special fund budget of $145 million. This brings our total 2014-15 recommended education budget to $423 million, representing an overall decrease of $5 million, or 1.2% over the 2013-14 budget of $428 million. So where does our funding go? Over the past 7 years, and heightened by our need to reform, we have taken great strides, as Chairman Waring pointed out, in prioritizing funds direct to students, schools, and classrooms. We have devoted a greater share of our fiscal resources towards our schools, students, and classrooms, moving from 66% in 08-09 to 81.3%, or $343.8 million for 2014. Our total per pupil expenditure, we spend $12,544 at schools and the remaining almost $2,900 at central services. And as Mr. Waring also noted, throughout our reform, equity and funding for our neighborhood schools has been a priority for this district. And as depicted by the slide on the right, the average per pupil spending at our neighborhood schools is almost $13,100 compared to the average per pupil spending at our host magnet schools of $12,268. So as you can see here, that the average neighborhood per pupil spending exceeds host magnet school spending by almost 7%, or approximately $810 per pupil. The next slide is a graphical representation of the all funds budget and the supporting revenue. As indicated by the graph on the left here, general budget makes up 67.1% of the total operating budget of $423 million, and special accounts for the remaining 32.9%. Given the fiscal challenges over the last several years and our consecutive years of flat funding in the general fund, grants and donations are representing an increasing percentage of our total operating budget, having increased from 28% to approximately 33%. As indicated by the graph to the right, the revenue to support the budget is derived through 5 resources here. The largest is the state pass-through grants, namely the ECS, the transportation subsidy, and a very small health and welfare subsidy. Total almost 45%, or $190 million. Grant and private funding, we have state grants at almost 24%, or $100.4 million. Federal grants make up 7.3%, or $31.1 million. And then private foundation funding at 1.8%, or $7.6 million. And the balance here is generously provided by the local tax effort here in the city of Hartford, for which we're very appreciative of. And that is 22.2%, or $94 million. The detailed revenue assumptions to support these figures are also on page 22 in the appendix section of this presentation as well. So before we move on to look at the driving forces contributing to our overall change, we wanted to highlight the effect on our budget has had on the mill rate of the city of Hartford. Over the last 7 years, the local tax efforts have provided an increase in the direct appropriation to the Board of Ed of approximately $700,000. And the city recognized a decrease in the indirect contributions, and those would be the debt service and in-kind services provided to the Board of Education, of approximately $5.3 million. So the overall contribution from the city of Hartford to the education budget moved from $115.1 million in 2008-09 to $110.5 million projected for 2014-15. During the same period, if you look at what's happened to the mill rate here, is the mill rate has or is proposed to increase overall over the 7-year period by 8.5 mils, moving from 68.34 to 76.79 mils proposed. If you use the value of 1 mil adjusted for the estimated collection rate, the total mill rate associated with education has decreased over a 7-year period from 35.75 in 08-09 to 33.05 for 2014-15, or a decrease of 2.7 mils over 7 years. Furthermore, in 2008-09, the city contribution to education represented 52.3% of the mill rate. proposed, this will decrease by 9.3%, and in 2014-15, the city contribution to education is proposed to represent only 43% of the total mill rate in the city of Hartford. So I think this speaks to that the Board of Education is certainly trying to do our part to be a good fiscal partner with the city of Hartford. And again, we're very appreciative of all that the city does to contribute to education. The HPS, the Hartford Public Schools budget, supports a projected enrollment total of 27,410 students. We've provided a historical enrollment comparison, so you can see that annually our enrollment is increasing in our schools. We expect another increase in 2014-15. We're expecting an increase of 706 students, or 2.6%, as it compared to the actual enrollment of 26,704 students in 13-14. There is a projected increase of 534 students in our city schools and a projected increase of 176 students attending choice and interdistrict schools. And we're estimating that 4 students in outplaced special education facilities will decrease as a result of graduation. So as we're moving on, slide 12 represents the budget drivers by major category. You've seen these throughout the years. We have 11 major categories of drivers here. 5 of these major categories are increasing and 6 are decreasing. The first of our major categories is salary accounts. Salary accounts are increasing by approximately $3.4 million, or 1.5% on salary accounts. This increase is attributable to 5 influencing factors, and those factors are actually detailed on page 10 of the budget book.
Could I?
Yes.
You mentioned salaries increasing 1.5%?
1.5% on the salary accounts, correct.
Okay, and so, and what's reflected here, maybe I'm just not reading it correctly, is 0.8%?
Yeah, that's of the increase. That's salary, the salaries 3374 represents 0.8% of the 1.2% overall decrease.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, but this is, the 1.5 is actually of the salary accounts themselves. To summarize, again, on the 5 influencing factors are detailed on page 10 of the executive summary of the budget book, but I'm going to summarize. The contractual salary increases and net position changes have actually increased the salary accounts by $9.8 million. These increases were mitigated through cost reductions of $6.4 million in salary accounts. We looked at counts such as overtime, part-time, extra pay, substitute. We looked at our attrition rate, and we looked at our severance liabilities, and we anticipated decrease. So again, that increasing of 9.8 less the 6.4 that was mitigated resulted in the overall $3.4 million increase in the salary accounts. The next driver here is student tuition, and student tuition increases a little over $3.1 million, or 5.7% on tuition counts. There's 2 primary drivers associated with this increase. The first is special education tuition. Special education tuition is expected to rise by 7.6%, or $2.1 million, and it represents 68% of the increase in the tuition accounts. The other increase here is interdistrict magnet tuition is rising by just under $1 million. And when we talk interdistrict, we're talking about our students that are going out through the interdistrict choice process, attending the CREC schools or the VOAG programs run throughout the greater Hartford area. Rental of facility accounts are increasing by approximately $962,000, or 24.3%. And the vast majority of this increase is associated with the move of Weaver Culinary temporarily to the Lincoln Culinary Institute while the Weaver campus undergoes the extensive renovation project. Utilities will increase by approximately $352,000 or 4.1%, attributable to rate increases as a result of the RFP and the lapsing of the Trans-Canada contract. Supplies and materials increased by a little over $110,000 or 1.3%, a very small increase, about $4.02 on supplies per student. And equipment will decrease by approximately $3.4 million or 57.4%. The majority of the decrease here, 66%, is the result of one-time funding that we had received to purchase equipment and technology for schools. And the remaining 34% or $1.1 million represents cost mitigation strategies necessary given the fiscal and economic outlooks impacting our overall revenue. Building improvements decreased by $2.9 million or 96.2%. That is a staggering amount, but I want to assure you that 96.4% of that decrease is attributable to the lapse of one-time funding that the school district did receive. It was called incubation funding received from the State Department of Education for new and expanding host magnet programs. The balance of the decrease here is attributable to cost mitigation strategies. Fringe and insurance is decreasing by $2.6 million or 4%. The decrease is mainly a result of our cost mitigation strategies. And in this packet as well, on page 23, you'll actually see the specific areas that are adding to the overall decrease. Professional contracts are decreasing by $1.2 million or 8%. This was a cost mitigation area as well. Throughout the years, we have looked for professional services and contracts as a means to increase staff capacity. As our staff capacity is increased, we can reduce our reliance on professional contracts and services, and this budget reflects that reduction on that reliance. Student transportation is decreasing by approximately $1.4 million or 5.6%. We recently concluded an RFP process for our special education bus transportation contract, and the decrease here is the savings associated with that RFP process. And all other accounts are decreasing by $1.4 million or almost 14%, and the overall decrease is a result, again, of cost mitigation strategies in the budget. So you've heard me talk a lot here, cost mitigation, cost mitigation. Well, I have two slides that summarizes all of the cost mitigation. So every year, the Board of Education, similar to the city, has increasing fixed costs that are rising. We've been challenged as the city with flat or declining revenue. And this has resulted in our need to find strategies to mitigate rising costs and balance the budget. We deployed several cost containment strategies over this past year, and the 5 areas are going to be detailed on the next 2 slides. The first of those areas are we deployed a zero-based budgeting approach, which yielded operational cost savings and mitigation of $2.6 million. This is where we look at the budget and no one gets exactly what they got last year just because they got it last year, as they have to justify why they need that and why they're giving that. The next area is special education. There were 2 areas that I spoke of. The first was the transportation RFP, which yielded approximately $1.6 million. And the second was the out-of-district tuition. We expect to go down. One, because of the 4 students that we're anticipating to graduate out, as well as we opened 7 new special education programs throughout Hartford last year, and we anticipated that those programs would be opened as a place closer to home to service those students that need those services. Part-time, overtime, extra duty pay yielded $5.4 million. Again, we did reduce our reliance on professional contracts and services for almost a $1.3 million savings. And fringe and insurance has been an area of our constant look at every year. I think we're doing a great job recognizing that this is an area that continually needs to be looked at. We continue to negotiate labor changes, offer plan designs. So fringe and insurance actually netted $3.9 million in cost mitigation. One was the OPEB retiree subsidy and of $2.7 million, and then the negotiated contract and plan design changes yielded approximately $1.2 million. So our total mitigation effort was $14.99 million overall in this budget. And this concludes my part. Dr. Jacoby, closing remarks?
Yes, if we can. We wanted to share with you a favorite quote of ours. In the face of dramatic change, education is being asked to remake itself to fit a society in motion. It's in that context that the 14-15 school budget has been developed. Growth and change are inevitable. For us, what has remained a constant is our central purpose: educating, inspiring, and supporting our Hartford students and their families. And we've done that to make sure that 82% of our current funding goes directly to students. We have cost mitigation of a little over $14 million, and we've tried to be a responsive partner with the City of Hartford, recognizing the financial constraints. And we were able to do that because we have had a very successful degree of seeking outside resources through grants and support from the state and also from foundations. So we will be happy to answer any questions and hope that we've provided you with a pretty clear picture of our planning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, Councilman McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you. Good afternoon, Chairman Waring and Dr. Jacoby. Nice to see you again. And Ms. Altieri, great to see you as well. I want to turn to the budget book for some of my questions. One of the things that caught my eye on the introduction on page 2 was that mentioned a significantly increased student internships and career experiences. Do we know how many students were able to participate in internships and career experiences?
It's a good question.
Or
I think I'd have
could
to
it
get
be
back to you
obtained?
on that.
Yeah, you could provide that when you're able to. One of my questions was about the change in professional contracts and services that you were indicating is available to do because of increased staff capacity. To what extent is that the case, that we've been able to build capacity in the ranks of the staff so that they can really take the lead in further development of the various strategies?
Well, I think there are, a number of things we can look to respond to that question. We're about to, again, go back for magnet schools at Betances, for example, where we're an early reading lab. And we are training our own people in that specialized kind of approach to teaching reading. And they're going back into their buildings to implement that kind of service. And we're doing that in so many, many different places. So that I hear you're kind of asking to quantify it.
Yeah. Yes.
I would say if you look at the decrease in the contracts, you're probably looking at about a 35% decrease in professional contracts with consultants because we have built capacity in terms of teaching and learning, very, very important, in terms of parent engagement, and also in terms of building leadership capacity. We have a number of programs operating in-house that look at our strong staff and encourage them to consider leadership positions. That's all, much of that is done in-house.
Could you find out how many teachers have been able to go through and take training at the Betances Early Reading School?
Probably not as many as we'd like at this point, because unfortunately Betances was, had other issues that they
Right, they
were
had other
dealing
issues
with,
to
but
deal with,
we have a brand-new person in there. We're also incorporating STEM into that school, and certainly, what I would like to do, if I could, is come back to you to say, here are some of the ways, let me give you numbers of people that have been trained in various kinds of capacity building that we think strengthen the system and at the same time allowed us to cut back on contracts.
That'd be
Do
excellent,
something like
thank you. One of the things I wanted to follow up on was the student tuition increases of $3.1 million that shows on page 11 of the budget book. What percentage of that is attributable to special education?
$2.1 million, or 7.6%.
Also on that page, on item number 4, indicates a decrease of building improvements by 2.9 million. Now, I understand from the text there that that's attributable to some grants that are lapsing. But my concern is I haven't seen anywhere in the budget where there's budgeted for facility improvements. So there, I'm not missing something, is that correct?
That is correct. I know throughout the years we've had conversations where the general fund has put money aside every year for preventative maintenance programs, you know, so we wouldn't have the over-reliance on capital improvement funds. A couple of things have happened is, one, we have received incubation funds from the state to do some of those repairs and improvements. The city has also been very generous over the last 2 years and provided us capital improvement funding. While we think some of our facilities still need quite a bit of work, what we've agreed to do, and through the Board of Education's ad hoc committee on facilities, is we agreed to undertake a facility study and examine what exactly our schools and prioritize that funding. Given the fiscal outlook, we don't have many options right now for continuing to support that through the general fund. So we did make a request of a capital improvement funds. I understand preliminary, we're looking maybe at receiving maybe 50% of our appropriation. We will prioritize that based on our 10-year facility plan and needs identified through the facility study.
All right, when would that study be completed, do you think?
We just have completed the RFP process, and there are 3 responses to that process, and the team is reviewing those at present time. So we're hopeful that once the RFP process is complete, the purchase order is approved, that will begin soon. It will be a huge undertaking, so we will prioritize the facilities based on where we think they need to head first to identify those, and then we'll report back on what will be occurring.
Because one of my major concerns is looking at the CIP that's been proposed to the council is the renovation of Martin Luther King School, which I know has been a school in serious disrepair for decades, really, and has been very neglected. And it's not even on the plan for renovation until the fiscal year 2018-19. That's a long time from now, and I really wonder if we need to be spending some money to keep that school open and functional.
I mean, I think the King School issue is probably the most troubling issue on that entire CIP. I'll be honest, I'm not sure that we can wait until 2018-19, and I'm not telling tales out of school. I've expressed that reservation to the mayor, and he and I have agreed to talk about it. You know, at some level, we may have to invest money to keep the school open until 2018-19, but then there's a cost-benefit analysis to doing that. We're spending millions of dollars to keep the school open so that we can gut renovate it, you 2 years from now or 3 years from
Right.
now. You know, there are a couple of things that we might be able to do, maybe to move that up, but it's a serious problem, and I mean, it came as a surprise to me and somewhat when I saw it, and I don't know that there are any good or reassuring answers other than we have to circle back and look at it, because we approved our budget, in fact, inside MLK on May 6th, and the school can't wait till 2018, 2019
that's been my
to be
assessment of it.
renovated. I mean, it's not realistic. We have to find a way to move that up on the CIP. You know, if you've noticed, at least for the time being, Kinsella has come off the CIP in the amount of $30 million. There's maybe one strategy to move another school around that might allow us maybe to move King up, but it's still so preliminary, I don't want to say anything other than that there's a thought about it. But it's a serious issue, Councilman, and I wish I had a good answer for you. There is no good answer for it. I mean, it's something that I think all of us want to do. I think it's something that most of us recognize needs to be done. And I mean, I don't know the city's finances as well as I know my own, obviously. But I mean, we're certainly not in a position to appropriate, $60 million or $56 million to renovate the school. Are there things maybe we can do to extend its life a little bit? Maybe, but I really think that school is approached, maybe even past sort of its life expectancy without, significant repair, not even repair, significant renovation. I mean, you really need an as-new renovation in there. And I don't know that anything you do other than that is just merely delaying what you're going to need to do down the road. And I mean, if I were to beg the council for one thing, it would be attention, frankly, around that issue, because we have to try to move that up somehow. And I recognize the city's debt service constraints, and they're very real and they're very scary, but there's no good answer other than it's something we have to work at, because I agree with you. I think it's a serious situation, and I'm not sure that I feel comfortable saying we can wait till 2018, 2019. And I know certainly the board doesn't have the money, and nor, are we even allowed to undertake that kind of capital renovation on our own account. So it's not much of an answer, but it's the only answer that we can give you.
Okay, thank you. Let me try another version of the same question. Are there any priority facility projects that need to be done that are not being funded right now?
Any priority facility projects? I mean, we have projects all over the CIP that, that are there projects that, if they're not done, compromise health, safety, and welfare? No.
Right.
I mean, I think we've addressed all of those. So now the question is, take a trip to the Milner School, and then decide for yourself how long you're willing to wait to see that school renovated. But if there are projects that manifest themselves that implicate health, safety, and welfare, we address those immediately, and we make things work around that. But at present, I don't know of anything that's a health and safety issue. It's probably one level down from that, which is the extent to which you can legitimately say that, this is a school we feel good about putting kids in. It may be safe, it may meet code, it may, sort of meet a minimum level of facilities, but, how would you feel about sending your own kids to that school? We have sort of a number of schools that fall into that category. Clark is one, Milner is another. Those are probably the two most needy. Sand probably could use some work, and off the top of my head, those are probably, Burns is another that could use significant work. Again, I was in Burns on Friday, and I'm not going to tell you that Burns is in danger of being closed by the state fire marshal, but it is not the learning environment you would want for your kids.
Right.
It's just not, and it will require major work to make that happen.
All right, thank you. Let's see. The other item I wanted to bring up was the utilities increase of $350,000. I know it's a small amount, but one of the groups I serve on is the Clean Energy Task Force, and so we've been talking about the work that's done over at Mary Hooker Environmental Studies Magnet, and then it became a Green Ribbon School. And I'm wondering, has there been any discussion about how we could incentivize schools to save energy?
We've talked about it from your time on the board as well. Have we developed an incentive program No, I mean, the incentive program is if we do save money, now that we've decentralized the utility process, they can use that funding and earmark it for more textbooks or...
Right, so right now, if they were to save money, they could keep that and repurpose that money?
Correct,
Okay.
now that we've moved that all to the schools. And the majority of this increase, we've actually been doing pretty good. If I look at our overall historical trend on utilities, actually it's been in decline for the past year, so I know we're doing something right. One of the things that struck us with this year is we had locked in the city and the board with TransCanada. I think they were giving us at 6 cents, I believe. It was very, very cheap.
That's crazy
It was
cheap, yeah.
It was great. And I think when it's renewed, we got where everyone is now in the 8.5 to 9 cent range. So you saw that jump in there. So I don't think we'll ever, unfortunately, return to the rates. I keep reading in the paper, the utility companies keep going to the regulators looking for increases. So we'll do our best on trying to control consumption, but we're at the mercy of kind of what the rates are right now.
Right, thank you. My last comment, it's really a comment, not so much a question, is I just want to thank you for slide 8 on the presentation, because this is something that we've been hearing about for so long. And when I looked through the budget this time, I could tell just by looking at the numbers real quickly that we were finally starting to fund our neighborhood schools more than our magnet schools. And I mean, I just want to congratulate you for getting central office to such an efficient, lean organization. I mean, that's really amazing because we don't see that anywhere else in city government at this point. Thank you for getting those resources out to the schools, and I think that's really great that we're finally, and so now of course the neighborhood schools now have to figure out why we're not getting the achievement gains that we'd like to see. I mean, it isn't necessarily resources that make those gains happen, but I just appreciate that, so thank you.
And I appreciate the compliment. If I might, I would like to see us push more money to neighborhood schools than we do even now, and I'll tell you why. I mean, our neighborhood schools have disproportionate numbers of ELL and SPED, especially SPED, which are far more costly students. If you cost out, what a SPED student costs or what a ELL student costs versus what just sort of your run-of-the-mill student costs, it's far greater, especially on the SPED side. And so, at a minimum, these schools should be more funded because they have a higher proportion of students who have higher, needs, which translate into greater costs. I mean, I don't want to denigrate what we've done at all, and Dr. Kishimoto actually was very responsive on this and really began to do this, and I think we were headed in the right direction. But it's probably not even enough from an equity point of view to say, well, we've just crossed the 50, we've just crossed sort of parallel, and things are, our neighborhood schools need significantly more resources, especially when you consider that they tend to be in the older facilities that are sort of, less inviting and less physically attractive and frankly less efficient from just sort of an educational point of view. They don't have quite, the amenities that some of the newer schools have. So I really think there's a lot more work to be done there. And I recognize that's a policy decision in some respects. It's an allocation of scarce resources. But from my perspective, it's a good start, but we've not yet addressed, to my satisfaction, the needs of a lot of our neediest schools. I think if you go, for example, to Clark, you will see things happening there, but, could they use another $1 million, and I could tell you 10 things they could spend it on that would exceed $1 million that are legitimate things. But I appreciate the recognition, and it's conscious, and we're working at it. But, as you know, it's a battleship, not a PT boat, and to get it turned around and moving in a particular direction, is an immense challenge.
And that's a really excellent point, because certainly it highlights the fact that the burden of special education falls to the local school districts. It's not being picked up by the state in any significant way. Certainly the federal government is not playing its role. This is one big unfunded mandate.
Yes.
And we're not doing what we need to do to help our students.
It is probably the single biggest financial threat to every urban school district in the United States, and probably will bankrupt many of them, I would say, within the next 5 to 10 years. Unless you can find ways to contain those costs, it is the planet-killing asteroid for a lot of school districts. And I think you're going to see that probably within the next decade.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Councilman Deutsch.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. President. Welcome all. I think many of us feel this is one of the most important sessions because of the emphasis we place on our youth. Maybe I can begin picking up on the discussion that we just had, the question Councilman McDonald asked and Chairman Waring's response about the neighborhood school balance and funding, which, I mean, I speak personally, is one of the most common questions that I hear from citizens. A common concern is the balance between funding of the special schools and the others. So one question is this. Some of us, when we originally heard the presentations about school reform, way back with Dr. Adamowski and then Dr. Kishimoto and so on, we learned about student-based budgeting, which we thought, or at least I thought, took into account some of the special needs of students within that school building. So the building would receive, the educational program within that building would receive funding in accordance with the student needs. So that student-based budgeting, we thought, had a boost when a student had special needs or for language or physical needs and so on. And so I wonder whether you feel, Chairman Waring and the others, that this has been an adequate formula based on the student population. And the other part of the discussion just now was the school building itself, which, unless I'm mistaken, is not taken into account in the student-based budgeting approach. That is, the physical facility, I think you were just saying, is a different approach in terms of the age of the facility and the payment for rehabilitation of the building and so on. Could you explain, with the budgetary consequences, how we can all adjust for that in the budget so that the equity is maintained for the physical structure and the services?
Well, I'll start by answering your first question, which is the clear implication of my dialogue with Councilman McDonald is I don't think the weights were appropriate in the past for special needs and ELL students. I mean, those, you know, it's student-based budgeting is merely a tool, and it depends on how you weigh the various factors, right? You know, how much extra weight does a special needs student get? How much extra weight does a student get because they're in kindergarten and we want to, you know, provide resources up front? I think all of us wanted to see more resources, all of us on the board wanted to see more resources moving in the direction of special needs and ELL students, and I think we have, and I'm pleased we're moving in the right direction. Historically, I mean, I would say based on, you know, based on where we were to where we are, I was not satisfied with the relative equity between ELL and non-ELL and SPED and non-SPED populations. I'm more satisfied today, understanding that, you know, I don't have a printing press in the basement of 960 Main Street. I mean, I'm forced to spend the money only that I receive, and I mean, I have to, you know, if I take $1 from Belizzi, you know, if I want to give $1 to Milner, I have to take it from somewhere, and if it comes from Belizzi, then that's $1 less for Belizzi. So the basic answer to your question is no, I don't think, you know, it was the resources were moving in the right direction to the extent they should have been. I think we're doing better than that now.
If I could just
yeah.
add, from an educational point of view, we find that a number of youngsters who are included in our classrooms today have more intense needs as well. And more intense needs often means the need for additional resources. And so that I think that that's an area that we're all looking at to say, do we need to provide, does that weight need to change? And should the weight be a weight, and then let's look at what unique special services are needed. We've got youngsters that have very, very intense needs that are a part of our classrooms.
Through you, if I can carry on that. Some raise questions about the approach of school choice on the grounds that when you have a physical facility which is not in the best repair, such as the ones you just mentioned, Martin Luther King Elementary, and also a facility that has a greater fraction of students with special needs, like the same school or Clark or Wish, for instance, does it become what you would call in physics an unstable equilibrium, where there's a tendency with choice of families and parents to look elsewhere when they see their local institution declining physically and having a greater a fraction of those in need? So when you have choice, do you not see a migration away from certain schools, which then you would think per pupil would elevate the per pupil expense, am I right? Because you have less of a mass effect, efficiency in numbers,
Yes.
right?
There is some truth to that, yes. I don't necessarily think the flight is as pronounced as you might think it would be if you were to examine, say, the overall academic performance of a school. You might think that perhaps more people would be fleeing faster. But yes, do we see decreasing enrollments in certain schools? Yes. Do they tend to be among the lower performing schools? Yes. There is some truth to that statement.
So through you, does that have us question a school system based on choice? I mean, everyone likes to have choice, but if does it make us reconsider that each and every neighborhood school should be held to the same standard and have at least adequate budgeting for the services within the building as well as on the student basis, you see? In other words, the old-fashioned way is every school, you don't have a school choice, you have neighborhoods, which again, I'm serving as a messenger and probably using up more time on this question than others, but as a messenger of many people in neighborhoods who criticize that, what appears to them to be that trend, and then they see buses. I get constant comments from taxpayers and parents of all the yellow school buses in the streets back and forth, some of them only with a few students, and the expense and so on, rather than refocusing on the neighborhood school theme. It may sound old-fashioned, but some people give us that. So as it's reflected in the budget, we will be questioning the transportation budget and the distribution of special services and so on. Maybe we should formulate that as specific questions, but you see
I understand where you're coming from, Counselor, and there is some legitimacy, I think, to what you're saying. I mean, look, there are competing values. One of them is the ability of parents to pick schools that they think are academically appropriate for their students. That is a value, but implementing that value costs money. Another value is there are parents who want to keep kids close to home. That is a value. It costs less money, but it's a value the same as a parent should have the right to pick an academically appropriate environment. So, I mean, I mean, a simple question that you asked is, are we doing enough, say, for certain facilities? I think the answer is no. I mean, that's my dialogue with Councilman McDonald. A second question might be, you know, can you sustain an all-choice system in light of the cost and in light of, you know, the effects, the equitable effects of the distribution of resources? And it's a legitimate question, although I will say this, in some respects, the pie is baked, because much of what we do now is bound up in the chef consent decrees. So the idea that we would ever say we're not going to have magnet schools, you know, kids are just going to go to neighborhood schools, that world is gone. If anything, we're moving further away from that world under court-ordered mandate. So the idea that we would demagnetize schools and make them all neighborhood schools, it's not going to happen. If anything, we're probably moving, you know, in the next round of chef negotiations, assuming the chef plaintiffs don't go back to court and seek an even more radical remedy, to see more and more magnet schools, which means more and more choice, more and more busing. So I mean, you know, in some respects, it's a very important question, but it also has it also has a certain philosophical overtone to it, because at some level, there is no choice about choice, because so much of it now is baked into desegregation consent decrees that it really, a lot of it cannot be undone, even if we wanted to undo it. And so the struggle really is, how do you make it work within the constraints that you have, not sort of the interior philosophical discussion about whether it was good to have it in the first place or not.
Ask one additional one for now. Through you, I have several more questions, but just one more on this
Sure.
theme. Many parents, I notice in the budget book, in most or many schools, there's maybe one individual for prevention and intervention. In some schools more, in some others, and in most schools, apparently none for paraprofessionals. Now, many parents are interested and value paraprofessional help in classrooms, and so I'd like to ask as a budgetary question, but also philosophical, I guess, what about the paraprofessionals that so many parents have acclaimed, and the preventional services and so on in terms of the budget?
So the school budgets are decentralized, Larry. We send the revenue to the school, and then the staffing, you know, the schools with their school governance councils can determine their staffing. We've seen a lot of investment in the schools in prevention and intervention staff. We have different positions, you know, a CIS. Some have used paraprofessionals in that role. But most of the staff we see are the comprehensive intervention specialists now in each of the schools. We have 474 paraprofessionals in this district. A good majority of those are special education or adult support, or with our early grades, such as pre-K and kindergarten. We have in the past had classroom paras. But again, you know, given the staffing constraints, I think schools have moved away from that, elected to have more certified staff at lower class sizes in some of those programs. So they do have some flexibility in the staffing, but I assure you that schools still do use paraprofessionals. We have a good number of that, and most schools throughout this budget have one, if not more, prevention and intervention staff member, depending on what that looks like.
Okay, well, maybe we can answer the question, but I'm looking through a half dozen elementaries, ELAMs and WISH and so on. I don't find any paraprofessionals in the school budget. So is
so
that...
WISH, for instance, has 21 paraprofessionals, one prevention and intervention staff. They have 30.5 non-certified staff within their school. So I was looking on page 153 of the budget book.
Yeah. Okay then. All right. Thank you. So, thank you for that.
Thank you. I'd like to go to page 11, and this is the enrollment comparison.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want clarification, because what I've heard, I guess, and perhaps it's more anecdotally, is that enrollments are declining. And some of this discussion came up around the context of Weaver and the demographic study, and that needing to be updated, but projections being a lower number of students. And so can you explain that?
So we've seen enrollment actually pretty flat or increasing, especially at our magnet schools. I think where we've seen the greatest decline in our enrollment, and probably speaks to Dr. Deutsch's question as well, is stabilizing the neighborhood enrollment. Where we see is choice. We see a lot of choice within the magnet programs as first choice. I'm sure choice is correlated to student achievement all. Overall, the district enrollment, as you can see on page 11, continues to grow. But I think, you know, if you're asking us whether we think it's growing in the neighborhood versus some of our host magnet programs, I would say when we looked at the historical enrollment at one of our board meetings, we see that the majority of our increase has been driven by the magnet schools, with a corresponding decrease in our neighborhood schools. That speaks to something that we're currently undertaking with the City of Hartford. We're currently doing a demographic study that the city and board are collaborating on. And, you know, I think while Mr. Waring and Dr. Jacoby had mentioned that, yes, we are doing a good job of increasing the resources at the schools, I think, you know, the schools are being, they have less economies of scale as those schools get smaller. So we want to look at really how many students that we have here throughout the city growing up, you know, from birth to that, and then how many school offerings that we have. And I think we're all very interested in seeing that data to see what's, you know, I think we need to look at how many schools that we're opening and where our resources are going. You know, if and I know some of it is driven by Chef, but we now have a voice at the table at Chef, and I hope we can recognize that voice and make sure that our schools have nice, healthy populations like they used to.
Okay. And the other thing, our school crossing guards, I guess, are actually paid for out of the city's general operating budget rather than the school board's, Board of Education's budget. And is that, I mean, to your knowledge, that seems odd to me, and it seems like it's something that should be within the Board of Education.
If I might, Mr. President, I actually did some informal research on this about a year ago, and as far as I can determine, East Hartford is the only municipality where the Board of Education pays the cost of the school crossing guards, and they had agreed at some point to take it from the city, and within probably a year of taking it, they have been unsuccessfully trying to give it back. Although one might think of it as an educational expense, at least in our state, it seems that it is an expense generally borne by municipalities, not boards of education, with the exception of East Hartford.
Okay, thank you. And with respect to resources that are utilized within the schools, school resource officers or police officers?
That I don't know. I mean, I understand your question, but I don't know. That I don't know the answer to in terms of, you know, traditionally who pays for that, or is there, that's somewhat newer concept. Is there even a tradition, you know, what kind of precedent?
I think both of those combined probably come close to $1 million out of our operating budget.
I think the school crossing guards are more than that, right?
I think it's $830,000 a year, I think. Okay, so those are two questions I had. Councilman Kennedy?
Thank you. I have probably only two. Follow up on the Weaver question. Has the Board of Ed considered adding a public safety high school to one of its high schools, and more specifically possibly Weaver? I realize Craig has one in Enfield. I'm just talking about a local public safety academy.
I recall we had actually spoke about this at Weaver, and I did a little bit of research, and my understanding is that there was some work undertaken through the Law and Government School to take a look at a public safety academy, and for whatever reason it kind of got stopped in its tracks. So I will start that discussion again, but there was an interest in perhaps incorporating that into Law and Government rather than a separate and distinct school.
That's fine. If we could be kept apprised of that, specifically to Chairman Anderson, who's the chairman of our Public Safety Committee, and to Councilman McDonald, who's our Education Chair. I think, given some of the discussions we've had the last couple of weeks, we're very interested in where the board thinks that would go. My only budget question is, given the 94 minimum education funding requirement, and I'm looking at your book, your cost or your personnel costs, fringe costs, 63 million and change. Is it basically then our contribution? I got that from the back of your book.
Okay. There's an update in the presentation, just to let you know.
Okay. I'm assuming that that estimate was pretty accurate. The year before was looks like forecast at 60. No, excuse me. Forecast is 64, adjusted to 65.
Yes. So our current fringe benefit budget is 65.7 million. When we did this, obviously we were forecasting a surplus in our fringe accounts. At 64.4 million is where we think. You know, that will vary. Obviously, we're self-insured, so the claims will vary month to month for the remaining months.
The reason
We
I'm-
should come close to that target, and then proposed at 63.1 million.
The reason I'm asking the question is that previously, when I first began this job, the personnel and fringe benefit, the fringe benefit costs and all the fringe benefit costs were held by the city.
Correct.
And we gave the board then a dollar figure. So if I'm estimating that correctly, the dollar figure that we're giving you for your operating budget, so to speak, is roughly 31 million?
So when you transferred it, I don't even know, what was that, 2005 or 2006?
Yes, and if I
I
remember
think if
then,
memory served me,
fringe costs at that
it
time were
was
about
45. Yeah, okay.
Fringe costs at the time were 45, and our contribution was around somewhere in the 30s. So as I'm looking at this cost of the budget, and our memories are pretty accurate, I probably would venture to guess, when Mayor Perez transferred that to the board, which I don't think the board necessarily wanted at that time. So I'm just trying to figure out, in terms of your operating budget, the contribution you get from the city is approximately 31
We get
some odd million.
94. We get $94 million from you.
Understood.
Yeah.
So what's the question precisely?
What I'm trying to
I'd like to
figure
get
out
a
is in terms
precise
of,
answer.
because
Okay.
my question is, when you take out the personnel fringe costs, what the city's actually giving you in terms of your operating budget is accurately more like 31 million, correct?
If you want to say, if you want to say that all of the fringe was part of your contribution, I guess you can say that.
But that's the way it was before, correct?
It was, but we've done a lot in grants, so grants contributes. Every time we write a grant or we get a grant, if there's any grant personnel charged to that grant, is we charge off the full fringe benefits to that. So grants do contribute about 20 million of our overall fringe benefit budget.
Okay. I know we all get into his and hers and what's mine is not yours kind of
So
thing.
if you want to call your contribution 30 million,
I mean, what is
you
the
could-
actual benefit cost then that you think the city provides to the Board of Education?
I don't think that you do provide a benefit cost to the Board of Education. I think you provide a contribution to our overall budget, and we pick up the cost of our benefits.
I think that's where we're disagreeing, but I mean, if we could get a number on that, what you're estimating what the city used to cover in terms of your cost for personnel and for fringe benefit expense, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're done.
Done?
Yes, thank you very much. And
Okay,
I'd also
thank
like
you.
to recognize two school board members, Dr. Jose Colon-Rivas here and Mike Brescia. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
We'll
Chairman.
start at 5:45.